I'd also like to introduce Rosemary Dillon, who's coming to talk with me today, and I wanted to thank her very much. Rosemary's mum, Chris, died in one of the residential aged care facilities that we conducted our pilot in back in 2014 for our research. And Rosemary's here today to let us know about her experience, about her mum. So thank you so much for coming
Nikki.
today.
I feel very honoured to be here in this wonderful place, and thank you for your very kind invitation. I think we've had a lot of discussion about conversations, so let's have a conversation, Nikki.
Yeah, sure. So tell me a little bit about the circumstances that led your mum going into residential aged care.
I think, first of all, to start this conversation, let me give you a picture of the person that my mother, Chris, was. She was 4 feet 10 high, she weighed 40 kilos, so she was very small of stature, but very large in courage and resilience. She came from Ireland to Australia in the 50s and married my father, whom she'd worked with in Dublin. She subsequently became the mother of 6 children, and they had no family in Australia. That's actually important in this story. In the latter part of her life, Chris became unwell with a chronic muscle wasting disease, and she had difficulty with her mobility and swallowing in particular. She was cognitively as bright as a button, but she was physically disabled, albeit very determined to preserve what functions she had. My father, who was also dealing with his own chronic illnesses and managing his own peritoneal dialysis at home, with the help of a community aged care package, he became my mother's carer. However, when he became unwell and died suddenly in September 2014, my mother had no option other than to move to residential aged care. She had never considered the possibility that she would predecease my father. I think she felt incredibly alone.
Okay, thank you. What was the transition like? So she felt alone, but how else was the transition for her and all of you as a family?
I think, Nikki, death hadn't been part of our family up until that point. We had no wider frame of reference, so we didn't have any experience in this new thing that had just happened to us. So the word tumultuous springs to mind. We were reeling from our father's death, and we were trying to help my mother in the best way that we could. She was bereft. She'd lost her husband, her house, her belongings, everything, and she did not want to go to residential aged care, but she could see that there was no other option. After a short period of time, however, and when she came to accept this situation, she set out on a mission to learn all the names of the carers and a little bit about them, their countries of origin, what languages they spoke, who they'd left behind at home. So her knowledge of geography increased exponentially. She really enjoyed interacting with the carers, and she formed very close and important bonds with them. In the first 6 months of her care, she counted 63 people who had attended her, and she knew all their countries of origin and a little bit about their family story. We as a family rallied and we visited regularly. We managed and juggled our jobs and our own families, and we helped Mum enjoy the things that she loved: playing Scrabble, watching her grandson play rugby with the Brumbies, going to opera and listening to her extensive music collection. She also had a love of languages, and a chance encounter with a carer led her to have Spanish lessons once a week, and she did that until the very last week of her life. Everything in her room had a Spanish label on it. It was quite overwhelming. My younger sister Ruth had been diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer just prior to my father's death, and she spent a lot of time with Mum in those early days at Goodwin House. This was really important to Mum's transition to residential aged care.
And as she became more frail, what became more important to her?
During her life at Goodwin, Mum had had numerous challenges, but the biggest of all of these was when my youngest sister, my mother's youngest daughter, died. And these experiences, along with my father's death, were Mum's only experience of death, and they both occurred in Canberra's hospice, Clare Holland House. Mum was with Ruth when she died, and although I can't imagine how absolutely dreadful and terrible she felt to lose her youngest daughter, she was so grateful to have been there and had that incredible and moving experience. When it became clear to me, and not everyone has this experience or this knowledge, which Mum had, so she had an idea of about what death could be. As she became more frail, I initiated conversations about death and dying in general. And over a period of months, we got closer to discussing what Mum's own death might be like. And she was quite happy to have those conversations. Not with everybody, but she was happy to have those conversations with me. At first, she thought that Clare Holland House would be absolutely the way to go. But over time, that changed a little. The things that were clear to her in residential care was that, and towards thinking about her own life, she did not want to be in pain. She wanted her family around her. She wanted to have the carers that she had come to know so well and who understood her so incredibly well around her. She knew and trusted them, and they knew what she wanted. She wanted spiritual support, and she did not under any circumstances want to be in hospital. When she had been hospitalised a couple of times after very frightening choking episodes, which were part of her chronic disease, it was a terrible experience, and she really did not want this to happen again, and she knew that it was a possibility.
So what did you have to do to get extra support in that time?
When Mum and I were having the conversations about death and dying, I, with a background in nursing, knew that it was important that Mum's wishes were known, not just to us as a family, but to the caring staff and the staff of Goodwin House. So we completed an advanced care plan. Slowly, we'd get it out each time I visited and say, Mum, we're really going to do this today, okay? We'll go to the cafe and we'll just crack on and get this done. And sometimes we get one question done and then we'd say, okay, I'll do it next time, I'll be here next weekend. Eventually, we completed that documentation. And my background in nursing also helped me to advocate for Mum in general because I understand the health system. I did speak with the Goodwin staff at that time, and they were very receptive and totally in agreement with Mum's wish to stay at Goodwin House. What I wanted was reassurance from the staff at Goodwin that they could actually care for Mum and that a good death was possible in residential aged care. I was very happy to be told at this stage that that was possible, and also that there would be a referral to specialist palliative care, which completely allayed my fears. I helped Mum to write up a list of all the things that she needed to do before she died, like calling relatives overseas and writing letters to people who made a difference in her life, including a previous carer who she had become particularly close to. And the carer had since moved on from Goodwin House, graduated as a nurse and was working at Calvary Hospital. I delivered that letter to Calvary Hospital to his new workplace, and a couple of days later he surprised Mum with a visit. She was absolutely overwhelmed and could not believe that he'd taken time out of his day to come and see her as she neared the end of her life. It really made her day.
And when did you first meet the specialist palliative care team?
About 3 weeks before Mum died, she started talking a lot about death, which actually, and to people other than me, which really surprised some of my family and also some of the carers, because at that stage she did not actually appear particularly unwell. Mm-hmm. Nothing really had changed. Her swallowing perhaps had become a little bit more difficult, but no other major health changes. However, we rallied the family and made sure everyone knew that this was totally on Mum's agenda. She really thought that this was going to happen and we needed to take her seriously. And at that time, the team at Goodwin also could see that, and they made the referral, and we met you very shortly after that. Mum did reiterate her wish to stay at Goodwin, and I think we as a family, but also the staff at Goodwin, were incredibly relieved to know that Mum was going to be able to die in the residential aged care facility, and we just felt incredibly reassured. I remember you coming in that first day and thinking, oh, thank goodness. You came in and you had a really honest conversation with my mum.
Mm-hmm.
She was very happy about that. She was quite happy to talk about death, what's going to happen, what are they going to do with my body? Are you sure they're going to know that I'm dying? And you were able to talk with her about that so honestly. It's very hard to do, and not many people feel comfortable initiating that conversation, and you did that really well, and she really appreciated that. You then recommended some drugs to help her with her swallowing and her management of her saliva, which at that stage was becoming a problem. And that was very reassuring as well, because she was actually very frightened about choking, and she had had that experience. You also arranged for other medications to be written up, so that we knew if Mum in the middle of the night at 2 o'clock in the morning had pain, felt incredibly agitated or was upset, we knew that all that plan was there, the drugs were available, all we had to do was ask. Very different scenario to not having a plan in place. We were so clear about what would happen. And the other major thing that I think really made a difference, not just to my mother and my family, but also to the staff, we all knew that we could call you if we needed you.
Sure.
So maybe, Nikki, I guess because of my nursing background, I knew what kind of, I'd seen my father and my sister die. My mother was clearly close to death. I had a view about how I wanted that to be, and so did my mother. But I'd be interested to know what you think about how it could have been.
Yeah, sure. So I still remember the day I walked in the door to meet Chris. She was only 40 kilos, but she lit up the whole room. She was just, I don't know, a lovely presence, and she welcomed me in to the room. And I sat on her bed, and I just said to her, you know, what do you think's happening? How do you think you are? And she just said, what do you mean I'm dying? Is that what you're trying to talk about? And she was just beautifully refreshing, and her spirit was just absolutely gorgeous, and she knew exactly what she wanted. She was very strong. Physically, she wasn't so strong, but in her mind, she emotionally very strong, and just was able to let us know what she wanted and that this was happening. She was going to die, and it was going to happen soon. I see that so much in residential aged care. People often know that they're going to die, and they'll tell us. And we have to listen when they tell us that, because they get it right, mostly. So when I did meet Chris, she did have quite severe symptoms. So I know it might seem like it went pretty well, but I had to get medicines that aren't available on PBS, and I had to get them funded through Calvary Hospital because they're very expensive. And we did a lot of preparing to make sure that she didn't choke. She had a lot of saliva. She couldn't swallow her saliva, so it was coming out. So that was troubling for her. And so just having the knowledge to know how to help her with those symptoms was, I think, really important. And it also stopped her from going back to hospital. It did keep her really comfortable. And we were able to, as a team, so the residential aged care facility and us as the specialist palliative care team, were able to keep her comfortable. Getting the medicines there is really, really important, because that's not easy. So I think spiritually and emotionally she was really comfortable, but physically she wasn't.
Yes. Yeah.
And she needed that specialist palliative care knowledge.
I think from our point of view, the biggest relief to us was that there was a plan and it wasn't going to be chaotic, and we weren't have to be driving out to Gungahlin in the middle of the night to the pharmacy, or and find that it's not open and we have to wait till the next morning. So it was a great relief to us.
Anticipating what may have happened was part of that planning. So what were the last few days like?
I think it was about 10 days from when you first came to us until Mum died. And there were some ups and downs in that time. At one stage we thought she was actually taking her last breaths. And then, you know, I rallied the family, and that afternoon she was sitting up having a Magnum ice cream, which my sister, you know, quickly sent me a text and a picture. So you know, there were ups and downs. People were trying to organise their work, take leave, saying to their respective employers, oh, you know, my mother's dying and I really must go. And then 2 weeks later, well, I think she really is dying this time. But she clearly was on a trajectory, but she wasn't in a rush. She didn't, although she had that plan in place, she didn't actually need any medication for pain right until her very last day when she had some discomfort. She was fully aware of what was going on. She wasn't frightened at all, and she was enjoying the company of her friends and family. In fact, the last afternoon before she died, she was planning the music for her funeral. One of her great loves was music, so it was really important to her to have her favourite hymns and her favourite arrangements of those hymns played, and she certainly wasn't leaving till all that was organised. After she died, the funeral director came to collect her body, and all our family and a large number of staff joined a guard of honour at the front steps of Goodwin House to see her off. It was an absolutely beautiful moment, and it allowed everyone who'd cared for her to say goodbye and to support each other. What was particularly special for us as a family was that we'd spoken to Chris about that. She knew that this was going to happen. She knew that we were going to be there saying goodbye, and she wasn't going to be, you know, just shunted off somewhere in a cold, dark place. So it was really pretty incredible, actually.
What do you think it would have been like if you didn't have the specialist palliative care team involved?
Well, I think, as I said before, I do have a nursing background, so I was pretty clear about what could have gone wrong and how difficult it may have been. And the carers who looked after Mum were just fantastic. They were very responsive to Mum's needs and our needs. They knew her incredibly well, and us. But at the end of the day, they didn't have the specialist knowledge that the palliative care team. And nor was there any extra staff to cover Mum's end-of-life care needs. It was just business as usual. The carers had come to know and love Chris, and it was really important to them, as much as to us, that they were able to deliver the best care possible. So they were grateful for the things that you taught them towards the end. So they were able to do for Chris what she wanted and allow her to die as she wished, peacefully and not in pain. I really think that if we didn't have your expertise, firstly in assessing her and reassuring her and believing her that she was really going to die. That was such an important thing, because people were thinking, well, she doesn't look that different. You know, maybe she isn't going to die, maybe she'll live for another year. So that specialist expertise and assessment was important. Organising the medications, helping the staff to learn new skills, understand what was required, understand that they could get help. There really was a very strong possibility that my mother could have had a terrible choking incident and ended up in hospital on a trolley and died in the emergency department. It was my biggest fear, and my mother did not want that. The whole situation could have been so much more traumatic for all concerned. Staff might have had difficulty in accessing medical care. You ring the locum in the morning, they're not there till 11 o'clock at night. In the meantime, they're managing this person, and all the family saying, come on, we need some help. This is a horrible and terrible, worrying and frightening situation. So it really could have been awful, not to mention the level of stress that the carers, might have found. Because of the input of specialist palliative care, Mum's death was a celebration. She knew what was happening. She was happy to face the end of her life. She had no regrets. She'd spoken to everyone that she wanted. Her family were around her. She was comfortable. She wasn't in pain. And she just died.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, that's okay. That's not a problem at all. It is an honour to care for people like your mum in residential aged care. And I'm really glad that our service supports our research into integrating specialist palliative care into residential aged care. We do have an ageing population. We are in a changing space. The landscape is changing over the next few years. I work with very dedicated people in residential aged care, the carers, the registered nurses, the managers. They are so dedicated, and that palliative care is so important to them, and they do they do their very, very best. So working in that space is an absolute pleasure. We are working with barriers still. It would be nice to see some of the barriers be lifted. It is difficult to get palliative care medicines in place. It is difficult to be reviewed by a doctor. It is hard to get specialist palliative care input into residential aged care, and our ageing Australians deserve just as good death as everyone else in Australia. So we really need to be thinking about, and that's why we've done this research into integrating specialist palliative care. What we have found is that by planning for death for older Australians, by putting a really good plan in place, by anticipating symptoms, anticipating problems that people may have at end of life, and putting medicines in place, we have been able to get much better outcomes for these worthy Australians. So everyone is doing the absolute best, I really have to say that, but we do have some room to move. We can get better at this. So thank you very much.